Coming up, we're sitting down with the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs to discuss climate action and tribal partnerships. Then, on this week's Indigipolitics, we're unpacking U.S. Representative Tom Cole's new role and the growing need for international tribal advocacy with our very own Michael Stopp. And stay tuned as we explore a Sichangu food sovereignty initiative that's empowering communities to become more self-sufficient. Next on the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
Amidawa Hopa. Thank you for joining us. I am Aaliyah Chavez. We start today in New Mexico, where last week the Department of the Interior and the Bureau of Land Management made a historic announcement for local tribes and community members. ICT's Paris Wise was there and starts our reporting.
In Bernalillo, Mexico, Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland signed a public land order protecting more than 4,200 acres of public lands in the Placitas area.
Today, I am signing a public land order that will prevent new gravel operations, mining claims, and oil and gas development in the area for the next 50 years.
Tribal leaders, state officials, and community members gathered to witness and speak on this significant moment.
So grateful for everyone here. Thank you all so much for all the work that you put in. I'm grateful for you. It's done.
This order withdraws 4 parcels of Bureau of Land Management lands for which the pueblos of San Felipe and Santa Ana have long sought protection of. This order was first proposed by the Interior Department in September of 2023, but this fight has been ongoing for the local communities.
Oh gosh, the Tribal Council has been working on this for, at least a decade, maybe more. A lot of discussions in Tribal Council. And so the society people are truly wanting this in some sort of stewardship issue for the Pueblo. We're preserving the lands, first of all. We hope to get the Buffalo Tract in stewardship possibly, or in Santa Ana's land base at some point in time. But it's a game changer right now with Secretary signing of her document. So we're pleased to have her have done that today.
Paris Wise, ICT News.
In Hawaii, 2 reports released last week fill in some of the gaps about what went wrong during the Maui fire that killed over 100 people last August. One report outlines communication challenges like power and phone outages, along with language barriers during rescues. It states the morning fire was extinguished but re-erupted 40 minutes later and resources were already stretched thin. The second report details more in-depth challenges and improvements. A third report, which is expected in a couple of months, is set to dive into the origin of the fire. The U.S. Army says it will repatriate the remains of 11 children who died at the Carlisle Indian boarding school. Marionette Pember starts our reporting.
The 11 Native children died at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School more than a century ago and are being returned to their homelands this fall. The children, mostly victims of tuberculosis, were citizens of the Eastern Shoshone tribe, the Pechanga Band of Indians, the Gros Ventre tribe, the Oglala Sioux tribe, the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, and the Wichita and affiliated tribes. Such returns are emotional for tribal communities. I spoke with Theodore Isham of the Muskogee and Seminole Nations. His relative, Albert Miko, died in 1881 at age 17 and is buried in the Carlisle School Cemetery in Pennsylvania. He told me, "At least now we get a chance to bring closure by bringing Albert home where he belongs. It helps heal a wound that has been placed on us as descendants." More than 10,000 children attended the Carlisle school, which operated from 1879 to 1918. The institution's mission was the destruction of Indigenous culture and language as a means to assimilate Native peoples into mainstream U.S. society. About 200 children who died at the school in the late 19th and early 20th centuries are buried in its cemetery. Since 2017, the Office of Army Cemeteries has returned the remains of 32 children to their families and tribes. In addition to the 11 disinterments this fall, the Army is scheduled to return the remains of 18 children in 2025. The Army's procedures for returning the remains are subject to a federal lawsuit. The Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska has asked the court to force the Army to allow tribes more say in the process. Marinette Pember, ICT News.
We head now to South Dakota, where a new school will soon carry the name of a Lakota war hero. Marcela LaBou worked as a nurse in the Army in World War II, serving in France, England, and Belgium, including in the Battle of the Bulge. The first lieutenant continued her nursing career for 34 years with the Indian Health Service, and she served on the Cheyenne River Tribal Council. The committee considered hundreds of names, but chose LaBou, saying she embodied the characteristics of courage, compassion, and resilience before she died in 2021 at age 102. The Marcela LaBou Elementary School will open in Sioux Falls, South Dakota in 2025. With ICT's Mark Trahant, who recently spoke with Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs Brian Newland about the agency's focus on climate change. Mark, welcome back. This is such a broad subject.
Hello, Aaliyah, and that's exactly right. And if you look at the agency's budget, they're seeking $120 million to fund 146 projects in tribal communities. When I sat down with Secretary Newland, I wanted to know more about what's ahead for Indigenous communities, especially when we think about the impact of climate change on food. We know game patterns are changing, fishing areas are moving, and what is the process for working together to adapt? One of the impacts we know that's going to occur is what it's going to do to traditional food. Mm-hmm. Again, Alaska might be a place to take an advantage of that, where game patterns are changing, fishing areas are changing. How do we manage and work together on that sort of thing?
Well, I mentioned earlier that we have to have a yes-and approach. So we have to prepare for the impacts of climate change, but we've also got to continue to make investments in slowing and stopping climate change from advancing. And so we've seen that with the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. This is really a global effort that the president and his administration, Secretary Holland, are helping to lead. But when we look at things like ecosystems that support traditional foods, up in Alaska, we have an initiative called the Gravel to Gravel Initiative that we are working with Alaska Native communities and other communities in Alaska to restore salmon and protect their habitat. We're doing that in other places through things like dam removal, investments in fish hatcheries, and all sorts of things to protect traditional foods. And not just fish, lots of other places around the country where we are supporting ecosystem restoration with an eye toward protecting those traditional food sources as we deal with climate change.
And in all of these things, sometimes there's a plus sign on the ledger because there may be new, for example, growing opportunities that don't exist now.
Yeah, the thing about this whole effort is we want to make sure tribes are leading this, and that it's not the BIA of old where we're coming in and saying we've got all the answers for you. and we'll show you how it's done. It's really about us making these investments in tribes and Indian people, providing support, and then making sure that they're leading these efforts on decisions about, whether to rethink about what's a traditional food, and how to grow it, and how to use it. We don't want to be making those decisions for Indian people from here in the federal government.
I want to close by asking about young people, and it's really easy to be dark about climate change, but on the other hand, if you're a young person, your career is set if you have an interest in any of these areas.
Well, I think I love talking about the opportunities for young people, and really the opportunities for our country when we engage with young people and get them involved. The president hosted a tribal youth summit last fall, and I had the opportunity to attend that and sit at the table with some young leaders from across Indian country. And I was really impressed. And in fact, I told one of the groups I was talking with that if I were put in a position of competing with them for jobs and opportunities out of college, I never would have measured up, because a lot of young people from across Indian country, they are pushing doors open that Indian people haven't had open for a long time, and they're so talented, and they're not accepting the status quo or the old way of doing things. And that's the other thing that makes me really hopeful. We are trying really hard to make sure that we bring young folks into government through internships or hiring here to bring that new way of thinking into our work. And for me as a leader now, I view it as part of my responsibility to help open those pathways for folks. But I'm just really impressed by the talent that's out there across Indian country in terms of young people, and excited to see what it's going to do for all of us.
We are all children born of water. It is where all life begins. Water embraces and protects us. We revere it in our homes. We need to live close to water. It nourishes and cleanses us. All living things know this. Sometimes water is gentle and floats in the air. Sometimes water is harsh and powerful. Sometimes it catches the sun's rays. Water changes with the seasons, alive and always moving, even when no one is looking. Water is patient. Water endures. Water brings clarity. Water purifies our thoughts. Water brings us together. Water is holy. Water helps us heal. Water is medicine.
U.S. Representative Tom Cole is solidifying himself as one of the most influential politicians in Congress. And is it worth it for tribal nations to advocate internationally? Here to talk more about that is a regular contributor, Mike Stopp. He's the president and CEO of 7 Star Holdings. On this week's IndigiPolitics. Welcome back to the newscast, Mike.
Hi, Polly. Thanks for having me.
Before we start, can you talk a little bit about the importance of the Appropriations Committee and what it does?
Obviously, the Appropriations Committee is a very important role in Congress. The House specifically is charged with creating a budget for the country. They're the ones that have to come up with how to raise revenue and how to spend it. Obviously, the Senate can make changes to that, but essentially this belongs to the House. And so the Appropriations Committee does that. Now, just so everyone's aware, there's 2 parts to getting funding for something, a federal project. You have to have an authorizing bill, and then you have to have an appropriations bill. So the appropriations bill is essentially what funds what Congress wants to do, which has to be done through another bill. But having someone like Tom Cole on the Appropriations Committee has been great for Indian country in general. But now that he is becoming the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, it's even greater. You know, some of the things he's done in the past, and many tribal leaders can speak to the work that he's done to advocate for tribes, is increasing housing funding, transportation funding, things that really have been neglected in Indian country that fall under both the treaty and trust responsibility of the U.S. federal government to tribes. And Tom, being a member of the Chickasaw Nation and a very active member in his community, understands the need that tribal leaders are facing and tribal people are facing. I think as the appropriations chair, it's only going to get better. Obviously, we have seen a lack of funding and attention in a lot of different places, including IHS. And as I mentioned, you know, he has already worked in a lot of places as a subcommittee chairman to help with those things. So I'm very excited to see Tom take on this new role.
And can you speak to a little bit about the influence that Tom Cole has now? He is chair of the Rules Committee, and now he's also chair of the Appropriations Committee. And so can you talk a little bit about his influence in Congress?
Well, to put it mildly, he's going to be one of the most powerful members of Congress. When it comes to appropriation and rules, those are the things that really are what drives Congress. The Rules Committee determines what can be heard on the floor, how bills are going to be debated, how they're going to be voted on. Those things have to go through the Rules Committee before anything can be heard on the floor by Congress in general or be voted on. And then obviously when it comes to appropriations, before the federal government can do anything, it has to be funded. And so being the chairman of those two committees absolutely makes him one of the most influential members. And, you know, some other places he works, he is the co-chairman of the Bipartisan Native American Caucus. So it isn't just that he's a Chickasaw member. He does take it very seriously. He does work with tribal leaders. And I think it's very important to understand who Tom is as a person. You know, some of my more conservative friends might call him a moderate. I think he's more of a deal maker. He understands that there's more than one viewpoint to have. And I think as we've seen in the appropriations climate over the last few years, we've had such a hard time getting the 12 appropriation bills passed that Tom Cole, not just because he's Native, but because of his viewpoint on governance, will be a great appropriations chair for this country. We need someone like him who can work across the aisles and who can understand the different perspective of each of the members and try to come to a cohesive agreement so that we can continue to fund the government without all these boondoggles and cliffhangers that we keep running into. I hope that Tom, as both the chair of the Rules Committee and the Appropriations Committee, can really take a hold of that.
This year, conservatives have been very outspoken in Congress about cutting the budget. And when there are talks about budget cuts at the congressional level, the worry is that services like Indian Health Service, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and Native American specific programs will get their funding cut. And I'm curious to know your perspective now that Tom Cole is chair of the Appropriations Committee. Should this still be a worry for tribal leaders?
Well, I'm going to start by saying it should always be a worry. But I will tell you my thoughts on it and probably where Tom Cole's going to come from. And one of the other most important roles he plays as an influencer inside Congress is sharing with other members of Congress the importance and the history of American Indian relationships with the federal government, those tribal relationships, those trust relationships and treaty relationships. There are aspects of what we would call tribal budgets that are basically agreed to through treaties, which has the effect of law. It is on the same level as the Constitution, according to the Constitution. It has to be accepted. And so where we're talking about other types of discretionary spending, which may or may not fall under the Constitution, depending on your viewpoint, but may be better left to the states. When it comes to federal Indian funding, it is absolutely required that the federal government address those and adequately fund them. It goes back to that trust and treaty responsibility that the federal government has taken on, that went on in the majority of the 1800s, but continues now in the 1900s and today, that we have to make sure that the federal government does what it says it's going to do and hold the government to its word. And I think Tom Cole is in the best position to make sure that other members of Congress understand that, and as the appropriations chair can make sure to safeguard many of those promises the federal government has made, not only to keep them at current levels, But I certainly hope in many places like IHS that we see some kind of increased appropriations.
And what are some earmarks that you think that viewers at home should be aware of?
I am not aware of any specific earmarks. I will say that earmarks are traditionally difficult for people to understand. A lot of times, I think when you talk about earmarks, people automatically assume that you're buying votes, or you think about the bridge to nowhere in Alaska. But at the end of the day, earmarks are the responsibility of Congress. Congress has the job of appropriating funds and directing funds and how the federal government is to spend it. We have for many years, especially under the earmark ban in the House, basically left those decisions to unelected bureaucrats. Earmarks are Congress's opportunity to tell the federal government where to spend money. I will tell you that when I was working in the House as Chief of Staff for Congressman Mullen, we had a number of dire infrastructure needs that we helped get funding for, but because of the bureaucrats essentially picked the jobs, many of the infrastructure needs we had in the second district were not met. Now, there are safeguards you can put in place, and I understand people are worried about that. That doesn't mean that the bureaucrats can't determine which contractors get the job. I'm not saying that members of Congress should say my buddy who owns a road surfacing company should get this federal highway grant or money to resurface roads. What I'm saying is there are projects that Congress should be designated. They know their district. They're elected to represent their district. But I have no problem with a system in place where the bureaucrats have a system that allows contractors to be vetted and to make sure that they have the best bidding practices. Tom Cole has been in favor of earmarks. I think he takes the same position that I do, that it is the responsibility of Congress to direct this funding. And quite frankly, it's the best for the American people. We elect our members of Congress to go up there and make sure they're speaking on our behalf.
Well, that's all the time that we have, Michael. Once again, thank you for joining the newscast, and also happy birthday.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thanks, Polly.
Chi Escalingwat. Chi Escalingwat. I'm happy-minded. I'm happy-minded. Chi Escalingwat. Chi Escalingwat. I'm happy-minded. I'm happy-minded.
Animation brings magic to life, and that's the case with our next story. We Carry You With Us celebrates culture and community. ICT's Ashley Sinclair has more on the short film created by the Urban Indian Health Institute.
The animated film We Carry You With Us, directed by Abigail Echohawk with art by Sage Romero, is an act of Indigenous resistance. Echohawk said that the film strives to break stereotypes and show the beauty of Indigenous culture.
I created this story really thinking about the stories that have been told to me across the nation from different tribes, and wanted to represent that Indigenous people gathered information, whether it be in our beadwork, whether it be in the way that we cultivated the science around us for our traditional medicines. We gathered it, we had people who protected it, and there were times when we came together as tribes and we shared information for the good and well-being of our community. And so that was the entire purpose of this animation, was to show the beauty of who we are and quit letting other people determine what our story is. We were always data gatherers. And so I'm really trying to shift this idea that we never were, and instead say, this is our opportunity to reclaim who we are and to say data is ours and should be governed by us, and that we are the ones who are going to ensure its use for the good and well-being of our people.
It took Sage Romero 5 months to make sure that every scene held importance. Romero said that the flowers for the Inuit tribe took the most time to draw.
I wanted to make sure the flowers are right. And there were some changes that I had to make to the Inuit character, where I had to change the hood. And, it's not like film where something that needs to be changed, maybe the producer doesn't like this or the director wants this changed. With film, you can just go back and shoot it. Whereas this, you have to go back and erase every single frame that has to be done, and and then draw it back in the way it should be. So that frame where she's walking in front of the flowers, I think that was that, because I had to change her entire hood and the stylization of it, and then I had to adjust everything to where those flowers were done. And even you might not see it because it's so quick, but when the Awanichi part is, you see all of the images of the people standing in the background. I drew every single one of those persons that are in there, and it just takes a lot of time. And then you plug it in, and then it's in there for like 5 seconds. It's kind of fun, to know you put so much effort in it, but at the same time, it's just like bam. But if you really look at it when it's happening, then it's like, oh, maybe when people rewatch it, then they could really look into it and say, oh, there's those, I didn't see those before.
From the mesmerizing visuals to the creative storytelling, animation continues to push the boundaries of storytelling in ways that captivate audiences of all ages. You can watch the video on the Urban Indian Health Institute's website and YouTube channel. Ashley Sinclair, ICT News.
Possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.